Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Pion. I'm part of the BBU finance team. Been with BBU for about 7 years now. I'm also one of the leads for AAPI Big, and I just wanted to start off by saying welcome and thank you so much for tuning in today for a kickoff celebration. I would also like to briefly talk about this month's theme, which is unity through story and uplifting AAPI voices through representation. So, wanted to start off with the word representation. What is representation, and why does it matter? I mean, after all, our founding fathers said, no taxation without representation, meaning you can't just take our economic outputs, but refuse to give us inputs when it comes to making decisions about how things are run. And at the end of the day, this is a very human sentiment. No one wants to be used in a one-way relationship. And yet, I think many AAPI folks have felt this way throughout US history. Throughout US history, a lot of AAPI folks were brought to the US for cheap labor, but whenever there was an economic downturn, violence was committed against them with no real consequence. You can look up the Los Angeles Chinatown massacre or the Wyoming coal miner massacre for more details. And so we felt that we're wanted for economic outputs, but not much else, a one-way relationship. And unfortunately, there are still slight echoes of this remaining to this day. The model minority myth has led many Americans to view API folks as good employees or good students. But the moment COVID hit, anti-Asian sentiment and hate crimes against API folks spiked to all-time highs. I'll share a couple statistics with you. In 2021, 11% of Americans said that Asian Americans are responsible for bringing COVID over to the US. In 2022, that number doubled. And now 20% of Americans feel that Asian Americans are responsible for bringing COVID to the US. And look, I'm in finance. I deal with Excel sheets. And trust me, I know nothing about the COVID virus. One more statistic is in 2021, about 20% of Americans thought that Asian Americans are more loyal to their home country than they are to the US. In 2022, that number increased to 33%. And 33% think we're more loyal to Asia than we are to the US. Both these things are headed in the wrong direction. And it's this sort of sentiment that led FDR to lock up 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II in internment camps, something that German Americans and Italian Americans were not subject to. Only 29% of API folks feel like they belong and they feel fully accepted in the US. And that means over 70% of Asian folks don't feel like they belong here. And I want to speak a little bit to that experience. After all, I was born here, I speak fluent English, I vote in every election. More importantly, I watch the Super Bowl every year, I dip my wings in ranch. More important than that, I love McDonald's, and I'm not just saying that for a pure American. I love Filet-O-Fish. My dad bought me Filet-O-Fish every Sunday growing up. So I'm listing these things because I thought these were the prerequisites to be considered American. But lots of times there have been moments where I've had to question that, and I'm reminded, I'm not quite there. Every single company I've worked for, I've always been called the name of another Asian male colleague, including here at BBU, unfortunately. And it was particularly bad with my last company. So at my prior company, there was an office of about 60 people, and there were 3 Asian men in their 20s. There was me, Aaron, there was an Asian guy named Chris, and there was another Asian guy, and he was also named Chris. So undoubtedly, without fail, I was always called Chris, in the break room. And it's a friendly thing. It's like, have a good weekend, Chris. Hey, good morning, Chris. And I felt offended because I genuinely thought I was better looking than they were. But obviously not. But anyways, all joking aside, and I know this doesn't come from bad intentions, and the moment I corrected my colleagues, they felt guilty. They apologized profusely, and they're good people, so I know it doesn't come from bad intentions. However, it did, make me start thinking, why does this happen? Why does this happen at every company I've been to? Because I'm not the only one who's experienced this. My wife has experienced this at every company she's been at. A lot of minorities have faced this at a lot of companies they've been at. Go on Twitter University and you type up a hashtag wrong Asian, and you see story after story of this happening. there was an Asian professor whose student turned in a term paper and wrote the other Asian professor's name on the paper they turned in. When the movie Crazy Rich Asians came out, People magazine had a picture of the cast, but in the caption, they put the names of the wrong Asian actors and actresses. 2020, there was a presidential candidate named Andrew Yang. There are reputable media outlets like CNN and NBC, putting in the picture of another Asian male, in lieu of Andrew Yang, or calling him John Yang, leaving him off graphics. And it's not like he was a fringe presidential candidate. He came in sixth in the Iowa caucus. I know some of these stories are funny, but there's more sinister things. For example, nurses mix up their different AAPI patients and give the wrong medication or the wrong procedure. Like I said, I know none of this is intentional. None of it comes from an evil place. However, it is due to what psychologists call a cross-race bias. And it's not racism, but it's due to being unfamiliar with that group of people. And I think it's time to ask why. Why are we unfamiliar with AAPI folks as a country? And after all, we've been here for a long time. Native Americans came from Asia over 10,000 years ago. Pacific Islanders from Polynesia settled in Hawaii more than 1,000 years before the US was started as a country. In terms of mass immigration, the Chinese started immigrating to America at the same time that the Irish started immigrating to America. The Irish were escaping the potato famine caused by the British Empire. The Chinese were escaping devastating economic conditions caused by going through 2 opium wars, also caused by the British Empire. And so we see 2 different groups of people immigrating to America at the same time for pretty much the same reason. And yet an American of Irish descent is seen as American, but if an American of Chinese descent isn't really seen that way. Point being, we've been here for a very long time. And not only have we existed here, we've taken part and contributed when we could. For example, before Louisiana was part of the US, it was a Spanish colony, and a lot of Filipinos lived in Louisiana when it was a Spanish colony. And during the War of 1812, Filipino men, nicknamed Manila Men, were drafted by Andrew Jackson to help defeat the British in the Battle of New Orleans, which was the final battle of the War of 1812. By the way, I don't hate British people. These just happen to be the examples, so I'm sorry. But yeah, just those are the 3 examples. And during World War II, despite the fact that FDR sent 120,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps, 33,000 Japanese Americans served in the US military as translators and as soldiers. In fact, the 442nd unit had 18,000 Japanese American soldiers. It was a segregated unit in World War II, and it was the most decorated unit for its size and for its length of service. More recently, AAPI folks have founded companies that enhance the lives of all Americans. Companies like Zoom, LinkedIn, YouTube, Peloton, DoorDash, along with many other brands that have enhanced our lives. Point being, we are part of the American story, and we contributed and we will continue to contribute. And that's why I want to talk about what is representation, why is it important. A lot of this happens because we tend to be dehumanized when we get viewed as a monolith or as a foreigner. And one of the best ways to humanize someone is by telling their story. I hope you enjoy our stories this month. Please attend our events, enjoy our stories, go on HBO and Netflix and enjoy our API created content there and share that with other people. But I do also want to leave off on a final note. What can we do as a BBU family here today? And I want to share a couple moments when I did feel represented. And in March of 2021, like Kaylin mentioned, 6 Asian American women were shot in Atlanta. And I was born in Atlanta, so it hit close to home. And I distinctly remember Fred Penny sent out an email acknowledging the event, condemning the violence and saying BBU stands with its associates. And I felt seen and I felt represented at that moment. Soon after that, I reached out to Nikki Lang, and Nikki and Megan helped us kick off our first API Heritage Month in May of 2021. And when hundreds of you joined, I felt seen, I felt represented for more than my economic outputs. And so point being, when we talk about representation, I don't have to wait for someone who looks like me to represent my interests. It's something all of us can collectively do for each other. And we can't change American public opinion overnight, but we can certainly start right here with our BBU family and let the ripple effect spread from there. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to Joyce.